4, 3, 2, 1. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to our webinar today, Managing Change in an AI World, a Practitioner's Guide. My name is Paul Branch, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at World Commerce and Contracting. And it's my absolute pleasure to welcome to our stage today two expert practitioners. First off, we have Margie Jorgensen, who's a Program Manager, Contract Lifecycle Management and Compliance at Cushman and Wakefield. We'll hear a little bit more about that organization and Margie's experiences in just 1 second. But I'd also like to welcome back to our stage regular presenter, Art Raguet, who's Executive VP and Founder at Altria. So welcome to our panel, guys. Now,
thank you for having us.
You're so welcome. You're so welcome. So we have an action-packed agenda as always. We're looking at managing change in an AI world. So first off, we're going to look at how it impacts into the contract management process. We're then going to have a discussion around the technical and change management aspects of this changing life cycle that we're in, and then particularly look at the impact that AI, that artificial intelligence, has on technology deployment and what the options are. And as I say, we'll be asking and answering questions as we go, but there will be an opportunity for a more meaty Q&A section at the end. So that's what we're about today. So without any further ado then, Art, what does change mean to you?
Well, Paul, that's interesting. We think about change, and I love this particular graphic, right? We think about things, we get ideas, we want to implement those ideas, and we hope that those ideas are going to improve the general performance or quality or output of a given organization or a team or a company. Or an industry overall. So when we think about change, it's not just a delta from the status quo, but it's the managing of change that I think we all tend to concern ourselves with in a corporate setting. So change management really is a process of transformation. It helps organizations move or transition to new levels of efficiency and quality. And if we don't change, if we don't evolve, we don't grow and we don't develop. I think for those of us who are involved with organization transformations in and around the commerce and contract management, for lack of a better term, landscape, the focus of our teams should be on those things that matter most. And largely, I think that means ensuring that the people on our teams, as well as those people's external to our teams, are willing and able and skilled to change with those change levers or things that empower transitions and change, such as technology, whether it is straightforward or emerging or proven or risky, but also, maybe just as importantly, how processes change, either within the organization due to technology, or within the organization due to external influences, or just through the understanding of best practices. Now, it's sort of interesting that we have a crowd today that may have a different perspective or may have a series of priorities. And we'll sort of put up a poll just so we know what everybody's feeling this morning. For those of us in the United States, we can think of this as a post-election poll, and I promise it is the only one, so we don't have to worry about being unsettled. So what is the most important sort of factor or aspect in choosing an emerging technology for your enterprise? People, process, platform, or all of the above?
So before the poll was run, we were debating what the likely outcome was going to be. Any view for what we're going to see?
Well, Paul, you've often made me, and you mentioned that we've done this once or twice before. I think it was your suggestion that we added the D, all of the above. I think that's sort of the cop-out, but that may be the most popular. Otherwise, I'm going to take a slight leaning towards process as being the next highest choice.
Interesting.
I'm going to go with all of the above. I'm going to go with all of the above, and the reason being is I don't know that I could put any more weight on one of those other options over another. So if it were me, I'd go with D, all of the above. Would have done the exact same thing had I been in school, but that's going to be my choice.
Right. Without wishing to influence folks, let's take a look. Let's see how folks did vote.
Perfect. The polls are closed, as they would say here on TV.
Indeed. We're now counting the ballots. Oh no, let's not. Quite enough of that. So it is really interesting. Look at that. So for those that did specify a difference, process was slightly ahead, but the majority of folks who did express an opinion today have said that it's all the above. Now, certainly my experience is that it's really that blend of process, technology, and most importantly, people that we weave together and blend in to deliver something that's quite spectacular. Does that jive with you guys?
I'm with you.
I certainly back that up.
Excellent. Okay, so let's look at the first element of that. Let's look at process first. So what sort of things are important to take account of when you're on this change journey? Now, this is borne out by our research. So as you know, World Commerce and Contracting does an awful lot of research around the CLM activities in general and the life cycle management process in particular. And Pitfall's research and various other components have identified how important it is for this, for you to understand who your key stakeholders are and manage them through this complex change journey, recognizing that it's that blend of people, process, and technology. Let's focus on, you're going to hear, Margie's going to share with you her experiences in just one sec, so I won't steal her thunder. But the importance of identifying use cases, the importance of identifying what it is that you need from a business perspective, to then do that map on your existing as-is process to look at the to-be process so that you know how you're going to deliver the services, not just in the moment, but also how you can ensure that your process that you engineer is capable enough, agile enough to support how your business will operate going into the future. So it's really important when you are looking at how you do it today, because that's not how you're going to engineer it to do it in the future, most likely. When you look at your to-be process, you look at the roles, you look at who can do what, the permissions, you look at security, you look at how the flow works between the swim lanes of the process, between the personas, the roles of the folks engaged, so that you can ensure that change management is at the very, very heart of the process itself, but more importantly of the implementation activities associated with it. Now, at World Commerce and Contracting, we have a number of frameworks that really help us understand change, particularly how change is applied within a commercial framework. So we have this VCU framework, Value, Compliance, Uncertainty framework, which is really a new approach to managing contracts portfolios. And it's really important to understand when a contract or a portfolio of contracts starts to move around this matrix that you see on the screen in front of you. So let me just spend a couple of seconds just explaining this. So what we've found is that contracting environments have a value component. So that value may be very much focused on the bottom line, very risk averse and risk management sort of approach, or it may be much more flexible, focused on top line, focused on opportunity and growth. That's your value component. Compliance, on the x-axis here, you may have a very strict compliance engagement, or you may have one that's much more dynamic, agile in its approach. Not chaos, but it is disciplined, but it is absolutely more dynamic. The third component that really enforces this complex change agenda is around the level of uncertainty. Where you have uncertainty in approach on the x-axis, or where you have uncertainty deliverable on the y-axis. Think of the both, where you have uncertainty in both of those components, and that's where you're going to find that you're plumped into this value-focused adaptive environment. What does that mean? That means that you need to have people, process, and tools that support an agile engagement. What sort of commercial model works well there? Well, on the next slide, we'll see our research shows that in that spot, really the only horse in town is relational contracting. So you'll hear a lot of, again, you see the links on the screen here. Take a look at the resources on the World Commerce and Contracting website about relational contracting. I'll just share with you just some of the key principles. There are 9 principles that we've identified. Stakeholder engagement and that communication piece we've already talked about being how important that is. The ability to assess, analyze, and mitigate risks as part of that problem-solving agenda. No blame culture. You're doing it's relational. It's all based on the relationships between the parties that supports this joint networking. An identified set of mutual objectives that encourage the sharing of gain, benefit, and the sharing of pain. So risks are allocated into the team that is best positioned to mitigate those, rather than where you've used your buying power to push it out to folks who are not best positioned to accommodate the risk. Performance management as a key component of continuous improvement, obviously an important part of it. So these are in that agenda, in that change management agenda, these are important aspects to take into account as you are rolling through and working in that what we call the value focused adaptive environment. Now, as contracts age and the commercial environment changes, so too do you need to manage change within that matrix to maybe a more traditional commercial engagement, or one that's focused just on transactions for that traditional contract focus. See how important change management is to move yourself through that environment. Really key important elements. So that's some of the theory. Now, we're starting to get some questions in. Please do keep your questions coming. If you use that Q&A tab, ask us questions as we go. Now I'm going to introduce you in just one second to the star of the show. A lot of folks I know have dialed in today to hear what Margie has to say. So Margie, over to you. Please do share with us your experiences in this complex change environment.
Thanks, Paul. Great segue into what our recent use case was on change management, and in particular around our contract management platform. You really did hit the nail on the head when it came to kind of laying the groundwork for how we handled our particular recent implementation. I am a member of our procurement team's Center of Excellence, or COE for short. Our COE team supports our entire organization throughout the enablement of procurement technologies, processes, governance and compliance, reporting and analytics, training and development, and so on. So we play a pretty critical role in all of those aspects, and that's just to name a few. My piece of that particular puzzle, at least as it pertains to our call today, is as program manager and subject matter expert for our contract management platform. But before I segue into our recent market experience around change management and the replacement of that contract management solution, I wanted to take a moment to set the stage and tell you a little bit more about Cushman & Wakefield. We are one of the largest global commercial real estate service firms in existence today. We have over 400 offices in 600 countries around the world and growing. From a timeline standpoint, the last 6 years for our company has been really instrumental in getting us to where we are today. So as you can see from this slide, between 2014 and 15, our company was involved in a sprint of merger and acquisition transactions, which culminated in the mergers of 3 major players in the industry, all under the Cushman & Wakefield brand. And is not uncommon when you're talking about merging companies. We were faced with some logistical challenges. One of those challenges was the integration of disparate systems that were coming in from those companies and the standardization of business processes. So initially, the decision was made to leverage an existing business software partner for contract management. Now I'm going to do air quotes for this. He who shall not be named was a suite provider who offered, among other things, contract management, as well as several other procurement-related modules that we were keen to leverage. And although at the time that was a step in the right direction for us as far as synthesizing our processes, it was not long before we realized that we needed to make a change. And for those wondering why, Art, if you can go back a slide. For those wondering why, this slide actually highlights some of the reasons to support our technology change. But what it really boiled down to was our need to evolve, but with a platform who was not evolving with us. Next slide. So what did we do? We implemented a 5-step plan to explore kind of what the current offerings in that contract management space were. And our step 1 was to figure out what was out there. And to do that, we elicited recommendations from some of our key stakeholders within the business. We did a web search, of course, to find out who else was out there. And we reviewed several notable third-party reviewer sites. But when that was all said and done, what we had was an initial list of 42 CLM software providers. And trust me, that was not all of them, but it was just the ones where at first glance we said, wow, okay, this is something we want to get a vendor we wanted to get more information from. So after some pre-qualification discussions with those 42, we ultimately selected 26 of those vendors to go to a formal request for information or RFI type solicitation with. And this step for us was crucial in order for us to weed out the providers who were not going to meet our minimum requirements. And this was done during our requirements gathering session. This also afforded us a glimpse, a more detailed glimpse into what the market was offering in the CLM space at that time. And then based on those RFI responses, we whittled down the list of 14 providers that we went to RFP or request for proposal with. From there, we down selected to 5 that appeared, at least from an RFP and RFI standpoint, to meet our minimum requirements, and those that we really wanted to get some more information from as far as a live demo was concerned. And ultimately, the decision was made to move forward with Ultria.
Margie.
So before we move off that, just a quick question that's come in.
Shoot.
So 42 down to 1, how long did that take?
We began the process in February. I think we went to official RFI in March of 2019. We were ready to enter the contracting process by April. So we did take a couple months to kind of go through that 42 down to 1. And then, of course, the contracting process does take a little bit of time as we're going through the negotiations and the formal contracting. But we actually kicked off our initiative to replace in, I believe, formally that occurred. And Art, you have to keep me honest on this. I want to say it was the end of July, no, June or July, right? June or July, we kicked off our formal quote unquote implementation process, and we went live in December. So we had a very aggressive timeline that we were following on this. But for us, we had to have a tool implemented by December because our contract with he who shall not be named was expiring. And so it was very important for us that we had to maintain that timeline, which we were able to do successfully.
I love the Harry Potter reference. That's great. Another question.
Hey, I'm not throwing anybody under the bus here.
No. Another
As
question that came up, and of course, I think, Paul, it's because of the audience that we have. When you, this is a question first for Margie, when you got down to the sort of that negotiation with finalists stage, did you share your T's and C's with the 3 final vendors and use red lines to your contracts as part of your sort of evaluation process?
That's a really good question. Did we share our T's and C's? The answer was at that point, no. So our negotiation with the finalists at that point was more around pricing. And then once we did move forward with kind of 2 in parallel. And when we got to that point, we were looking at more detailed of here's our contract, what kind of issues are we going to have along the contracting side of things. So initially it was not, give them all the T's and C's right away. It was begin that pricing negotiation and then take the 2 that we thought were going to be the best as far as, meet our budget guidelines. And then that was when we went to the T's and C's and began the discussions around the contract and what issues there would be with the contract.
Fair enough.
So we're getting a lot of questions on this piece. So question is, if you were going to do this again, what would you do? What would you absolutely do again? And the flip side, what would you absolutely not do again?
That's a really good question. Honestly, I think I would probably spend, and this is me, so I'm talking for me, I'm not talking for our entire group. So
Sure.
For me, if I had to do it again, I think I would probably spend a little more time on the pre-qual. And instead of just having conversations around what the platforms would do, it would actually be to spend time to get like a pre-demo, so to speak, of the actual platform itself, because seeing is believing. And the salesmen will tell you that, most salesmen, can sell you the kitchen sink. So they'll tell you the platform does everything in its brother. But when it really boils down to it, if you can see what it is that they have to offer, I think it'll make life a lot easier, particularly so, when it comes to that pre-vetting. And then once you've seen the platform and kind of seen in a very high level overview of what it does, then I think you're in a better position to move down to that RFI stage. And then once you do get to the product demos, it can be much more honed in to the specifics around your particular guidelines as opposed to what the platform does in general.
Really, really interesting.
And that would be my negative know-how on that. Otherwise, the process and the plan that we put in place was pretty robust, and it was very successful. Not only did we come up with an amazing business partner in Ultria, but we also got a platform that was light years from what we had in the past, and it also has a lot of potential future expansion options for us as well.
I've got a great question here. It sounds like Ian is wrestling with a similar problem to the one that you had. So if a procurement team believes that it surely makes sense to choose the incumbent leading spend suite provider's CLM module, rather than all the hard work of integrating a standalone CLM provider, what would you do to counter that argument? Is it hard to integrate into a suite provider? And is it really that much better? That's his questions.
Well, you know what? Actually, let's go to the next slide, Art, because I think that that kind of segues into what Ian's talking about. So one of the issues that we obviously had was to stick with a suite provider, whether it be our incumbent or otherwise, or look at a best in breed solution. And in that form, we're talking about kind of a single market segment provider. And obviously there are advantages and disadvantages in both worlds, whether to suite or not to suite, as I was joking around.
I love that.
But for us, and what we found was that our best option was going to be to proceed with a best in breed or best market segment provider. And the reason for that is one of the things that we found from having gone from a suite provider to best in breed was that the platform itself didn't evolve. and I don't know how many of you have had this, but when you have large suite providers, one thing that tends to happen a lot is it seems like those providers are focused on one particular module as far as building it up. Sometimes maybe they're, buying other competitors left and right, and they're trying to take these other pieces of the puzzle and adding it all in. And because of that, they never really focus on the big picture, or they never really focus on a particular piece of the module that you're using. So that was one of the real issues that we had. So for us, having a single market segment provider was going to allow us to have a system that could evolve with us, which was very, very important for us. But it's also because we're not in a one-size-fits-all world. We're just not. In this day and age, with as many different providers that are out there, and with the technology as it is, and Art, you're obviously in a better position to speak to this than I am, integration is very robust and somewhat simplistic. So the integration aspect of it, Ian, really is not that big of a deal. Most of the providers nowadays, or many of them, I should say, have open APIs, so they can integrate with just about anything. So the integration piece of it was not really a major issue. But I will say that for us, it was definitely more important to have a platform that would be able to grow with us, and we just weren't seeing that in our prior suite provider, which was our incumbent, and a lot of the other suite providers that were out there. When we were getting feedback, that was some of the issues that we were seeing all across the board.
Margie, I think that's a key point there, and it plays into Ian's question. Is it hard to integrate into a suite provider, and is it really that much better? Certainly, I'd be interested to hear, since you've done it, what's your immediate reaction to that one?
Is it hard to integrate into a suite provider or to move from a suite provider?
And is it as a consequence of the hard work, is it that much better?
I'm sorry. So is it better on a suite side or on a single market side?
Yeah, having gone through the single market approach, was it the right thing to do?
Absolutely, it was absolutely the right thing to do for us. Obviously, that is not the case for all companies, but for what was important to us as far as the evolution of our technology and the ability to be able to openly integrate, going with that single market segment was definitely the right choice for us.
Yeah, on the really interesting observation. I think our research has shown, and certainly my personal experience backs this up, maybe 5 years ago or even 2 years ago, prior to the advent of the open APIs that we see today, it was very expensive to integrate a CLM platform into an existing IT infrastructure. Now, with most, if not all, of the CLM platforms now have open APIs into many of the existing platforms. So the cost of integration is much less, but also most, if not all, have now moved into the cloud anyhow, where data sharing is much more streamlined as a consequence. The cost of integration has dropped hugely. Art, is that what you've seen as well?
I certainly concur with you both. And I think part of that reduction in cost is quite simply that our customers are no longer reaching out to the big four or to the large SIs to do this integration. That many of their internal teams are comfortable with cloud-oriented web services, open APIs, and maybe even sort of feeding back into Margie's comment about getting a pre-demo kind of setup. What we have seen is also more of a move towards sandboxing, including proving out integrations. So I think the fear and the risk of implementing or integrating a best of breed into an existing landscape is certainly coming down. And at least speaking from an Ultra perspective, by making it easy for folks to really sort of try it out, including the integration side, really helps further reduce the uncertainty, to go back to your VCU, of change.
Certainly. Okay, before we go on to the next slide, where we're going to talk about how far you've got, There's a question here from Robert, so let's take it just a step back, just back to the commercials for a second. Robert has asked a couple of questions around the commercials. How difficult was it to negotiate the contract with just one supplier? So I guess he's talking after you've done the down select to one, basically from that 3 down to 1. Were you able to sign the deal before your timeline?
Margie, can I answer that one for you?
Absolutely.
RFP is request for punishment. For proposal. Okay.
I'm going to use that from now on, Art.
So request for
I'm
insult.
sorry, really. It's yours to answer, Margie.
Right. So clearly you made your timeline, and that was. Robert makes another point, actually. 2 schools of thought on the contracting piece. He's done it both ways. Send your contract template up front to finalists, or hold it off until a finalist is chosen. If time is a big constraint, then send the contract to the finalists and tell them that a consideration for award is negotiation of the contract. So make that up front. In my experience, if you share, the more information you share in that earlier in the process, the more streamlined it becomes. Is that yours as well? Absolutely.
And normally in the RFP process, well, I don't want to say normally because I don't think there ever is a norm. It's a very subjective process. But in the RFP, that's a good time when you've down selected to the point where you're really interested in wanting to know what everybody has to offer. Go ahead and throw your MSA or your T's and C's out at that point and say, hey, by the way, here's our standard T's and C's. To the extent that you're going to have issues or comments to them or red lines, give us back your red lines at this point during that RFP process. Now, what that does is obviously it pushes them to get back what issues they're going to have, if any, with your contract, so that you're not at that very end stage to say, we're down to 1 or 2, and all of a sudden we're finding that they have a myriad of issues with our T's and C's. So the RFP process is a good open door to get that done. But I agree with if you go with one vendor, and I don't normally think that this is best practice. I think best practice is you would come to kind of a decision on a couple different finalists, so to speak. And I can speak from experience with this as well. In a prior implementation that we were going parallel with 2 different providers. They were very evenly matched from a process and platform standpoint. And it wasn't until we actually got the red lines back at that point that all of a sudden we found that there was a major pricing component piece that was not mentioned during the entire RFI or RFP process that we had, that just came as a complete shock. And it was literally put as a footnote to the contract. And it said, with regard to this particular piece of it, and it had to do with AI, that there was actually going to be a cost for every little contract that was run through AI. And at that point, it was like, you have got to be kidding me. That would be cost prohibitive to, an nth degree. So, those are type of things that you definitely want to try to get you spearhead right away. And that's why going with more than one provider and kind of running that parallel negotiation at the end is really important, because you never know what's going to come out of the woodwork. And what you don't want to do is spend months negotiating a single contract to have that come out and then say, no way in the world, and then have to start the process over again. That would be time intensive and completely unrealistic. And in your case, would have blown your timescales and completely. And you would not have been the popular person that you are today. Right. Okay. Let's move on then. Let's take a look at how far you've come. So we have that was then, the he who shall not be named. And this slide basically goes over some of the issues that we were dealing with at the time. Of course, that also goes back into why we wanted or needed to make a change to where we are today and how we've kind of evolved from then to now. And this has been over the last year since we implemented Ultria. But let's go ahead and jump to the next slide, because I think more than that was then and this is now. Obviously, most people have heard of Agile in a project management sense. And obviously, for those who haven't, in its simplest form, it really just means to break down large, I say large, can you hear my New York accent coming out? That's my Italian in me. To break down those larger projects into more manageable and efficient tasks. So for us, in a pre-implementation world, it basically meant getting that engagement from across our various business lines, networking and identifying the right people within each of those business lines for collaboration purposes, understanding what those existing processes were, identifying their needs, which we also call requirements gathering, and then getting on to the building and the implementation platform. But it also meant for us a phased approach to the implementation itself. So we didn't roll out Altria to the entire worldwide organization of Cushman & Wakefield at one time. To do so would have been completely unmanageable. And I'm sure we all would have been running around like chickens with our heads cut off. So what we chose to do and what worked best for us was to focus on smaller subsets of our user groups. And after that, to work towards a more methodical expansion to other business units within our organization, and then regionally to the wider worldwide group. So with that said, Paul, Art, I'm sure that you guys have encountered your share of change management success stories and others that didn't quite go as planned. Care to weigh in at this point?
Sure. I think part of it is a part of that change management journey is really to understand going back to the point that you made at the beginning, the stakeholders and who the use cases that you're trying to engineer to. A shout out there, if you look at the URL at the bottom of the screen there, software.worldcc.com, you'll find there our software comparison tool. And this is a great asset that we're very proud of as an association. Because we're independent, we don't have an axe to grind. These are views of capability across CLM vendors, both the transactional CLM vendors and also those providing more sophisticated portfolio analytics and the application of artificial intelligence.
I would have given my right arm to have access to that, Paul.
Margie, so many folks that I bump into when I'm sharing, they look at it and they say, wow, that's really good. And I would, yes, how much easier it would have made my life in that selection process. So first off, I encourage folks to look at the tool out there. But to answer your question, when you're deploying these systems, it is a complex change management process. Absolutely no doubt about that. Go back to what we said earlier. It's that blend. It's a culture change, people, process, and tools that really blend together to do something that's quite spectacular. One of the, it's a reflection, I think, of your experience, Margie, that you were second generation deployment. You deployed a tool already that wasn't cutting it. Many of our members, our research shows that a large proportion of these investments historically in transaction-based CLM tools disappoint. They don't meet the return on investment. They don't meet the business objectives that were specified at the beginning of the deployment. A lot of that is around the issues that are on this screen, around collaboration, around communication, around stakeholder engagement, around bringing your user community with you, and most importantly, that agile piece that you touched on. We could talk about that, just that one slide for the next half hour, but let's not. Art, what's your view on this?
Well, I think to both of your points, these are big projects. They're big deployments. It's part of the infrastructure. And as challenging as they can be for a global rollout or for first-time rollouts, where we expect that managing expectations is key, when we look at the integration of emerging technologies, whether it is RPA or natural language processing, and I realize I'm getting into some of the weeds, or artificial intelligence enabled processes, it further clouds people's expectations, simply because they're not quite sure what to expect. And I find oftentimes our customers, and maybe the market at large, they're not quite sure what to expect either. So, communicating that roadmap or sort of sharing that vision can become a little bit of a challenge. largely, I think from a pure impact of artificial intelligence, there's a lot of confusion, a lot of mystery about what AI is and what it's not. And without going through sort of the deep and nasty details of machine learning versus artificial intelligence, and of machine learning, whether it's guided, whether it's reinforced, whether it's leveraging deep, how it's using neural networks, we can get into sort of I'll say the bits and bytes. But the fundamental is that a good deployment of AI should be able to handle the kind of scale and at a kind of a rate of speed that is transparent to the user. Your user communities don't want to wait for contracts to be parsed and extracted. They want to see it almost instantly. Marty's mention of seeing something on a price list that had a per contract cost to it is almost counter to the use of any technology. If you're going to sort of meter by the drink, it just sort of limits how much people will take. Being able to successfully get your arms around the end state of how AI can help, I think is sort of key. At the risk of sort of trumpeting our own successes, we've been deploying AI into customer environments with very little fanfare. And customers instead see a faster, smoother process or more accurate data mapping and extraction and routing. And they don't really see the AI. It's very much an applied or practical approach. And doing that so that it is integrable within the CLM, but also to Paul's point about having that same capability for robust analytics, allows that investment and the expectations around AI to be realized across multiple business use cases. So I realized as I said that out loud, that sounds super, super confusing. So if I were to simplify that, right, AI can be very well used to improve the intake process and to automate some of those low uncertainty from a VCU, from WCC's a VCU perspective. Those low uncertainty tasks can be automated quite well at the intake level, freeing up people to do higher skilled or higher value jobs. Fundamentally, during an authoring process, the ability to disassemble third-party content and facilitate the review and the comparison against preferred language is someplace where when AI is used well, it's very transparent. The system simply gives you some suggestions, throws up the occasional warning if a piece of paper is way out of whack, and provides an enabling technology. And
but Art, do you not think that's really changed hugely over the last 6 months, maybe a year? Whereas before, my experience is, a few years into it deploying and natural language processing and machine learning, to do it successfully, you had to be a contract and commercial management expert to understand the subject matter, but you also needed to be a data scientist to understand how all the variables come together so that you can deliver a result that has the right level of accuracy, precision, if you like. Have we moved away from that now, do you think?
I think we have. And I'm sure it was just sort of a hat tip or acknowledgement of the development team we have here. It takes a lot of work to make an easy to use piece of software. If we move from the data scientist to the citizen scientist, and I think that is where we are today from an AI perspective, right? The AI engines can be taught by people who understand the business need at hand, because the back ends, the training system, the thing that makes artificial intelligence smart, has now advanced to the stage that a business user can simply show some examples of what they are looking for or what they are trying to accomplish. And the software learns from effectively watching that interaction. And then as you would train a puppy, and so many people in this sort of, recently quarantined world have acquired pets and the like, just as you would provide positive and negative feedback to a new pet or family member, as the case may be for some of my younger friends, the same thing happens with the software. Hey, the software did a good job, thumbs up. Software didn't do such a great job, thumbs down. You don't need to correct it. You just need to tell it whether it was doing the right or the wrong thing. The software will figure it out. This makes the role of the assistive software also self-fulfilling. So as it is trying to make the professional's life a little easier, a little more straightforward, this is especially true in the sort of the drafting and negotiation stage, direct feedback is improving the performance. And to your earlier point of data scientist versus citizen scientists, and whether we have to worry about the F1 score and accuracy clusters, in this mode, our AI platform has been built for one use only, and that is for contracts.
Right.
And we have cumulative knowledge. I mean, and that's, I think, also the right deployment. As you go beyond those first two use cases of assistive on intake and assistive on authoring and review, it's then also a sort of risk management or deeper analytic that can run against legacy contracts in a repository. And that sort of is that contract analytics perspective, not so much the analysis of the process, but the analysis of the content itself.
Yeah, I see similar things happening. Rising of all ships to the same level. There's a lot of developments in a number of these competing AI platforms that can deliver results now that deliver immediate business benefit out of the box, whereas that was not the case a couple of years ago.
Oh, yeah. No. A couple of years ago, it would take you a year to 2 years to build up your training set. We are sort of, shipping ready to eat,
Gotcha.
content
And
powered.
Art,
Yeah.
to your point on that, the building of that AI, I think one word of wisdom that I would love to relay to those who are on the call is that what we found when we were vetting suppliers in the CLM front, AI was very key for us. We definitely wanted something that was already in AI. What we found is that a lot of the software providers were running a little bit behind the times. They had roadmapped AI functionality, but as Art just said, it can take years to fully develop and evolve that functionality. So if you're looking at providers, make sure that it is not something that is either one, roadmapped, or two, that it's something that they recently rolled out, because literally they're going to need a couple years to really get all the kinks out of AI in order for it to be a good system. So just word of caution for anybody who's out there looking, just make sure that the AI's been in place and it's been in place for a while, that it's nothing new to them, just so that you can avoid the pitfalls.
Great advice there, absolutely. Okay, so let's look into more detail into the deployment steps. Art, what information can you share there?
No, perfect. Thanks, Brian. So when we think about the technology deployments, and I'll focus a little bit more on how AI has effects or can affect the sort of the deployment of contract management technology or platforms. What we're seeing is, from a roles and responsibilities perspective, there are some new roles that very quickly become important when you're looking at an AI world. So not that we need the data scientists, and true, we have citizen scientists, but you may want someone who is sort of responsible for what we would call the training, providing feedback and input to the AI engines. So it's a role that nobody had thought of, would be missing off of a Gantt chart from 2 years ago. But it's an incredibly important role, because that's what helps the software become highly personalized or highly configured for a particular company and a particular geography within the company and a particular business unit within the company. All of this happens just by giving the engine, so to speak, some good material to read. It's really what it comes down to, and providing some feedback every once in a while as to whether it's doing well or not. The reskilling here is really quite simple. But with the increased use of automation, what we are seeing is a level of upskilling. that folks who may have been in sort of prior roles relegated to, I don't want to say file clerk in a negative way, but they may have had an administrative responsibility for tracking and managing contract locations and key meta elements. This now, of course, is going to be, sort of embodied within the core platform. This frees up time for folks who might now be involved with triage or simple approval, or further automation of the process. And I think additionally, the ability to sort of leverage a core repository for knowledge management and best practice sharing, and sort of a curator or librarian function now becomes not just apparent, but in many larger organizations, a requirement. So these perhaps are roles that may not have previously really been involved. And they're all effectively enabled by the technology deployments. So automation, of course, I think very straightforward. What can be automated and how should it be automated? We talked earlier about process, and prior to this, Margie and I were talking about the pros and cons of automated workflows. That if your prior process was broken and now you automate it, you're simply going to be broken twice as fast. So it's a great opportunity to, as you look at your to-be process states, get them implemented within the automation platform. Leveraging your AI engine, I've already chatted briefly about, because I am keeping an eye on the clock, and being able to take advantage of relatively complex and deep contract analytics. Being able to really understand where risks may be embedded within contracts, and not because you've captured the data as you loaded it into the repository, but after the fact, after they've already, because the world changes. Everyone uses the pandemic and the force majeure, so I'm not going to bore folks. But there might be other things, such as entering into a government contract for the first time, and now needing to understand, where do you have most favored nation pricing with your other customers? You may not have been capturing that information. People may not have even known how to capture that information. And there are probably 7, 8, or 20 different ways that a contract may indicate that you're offering preferred or most favored pricing to a particular party. That's a great example of where you would use a citizen scientist to show some examples to the engine and say, go find, bring this stuff back to me. With this capability, a contemporarily skilled organization that's been sort of upskilled to handle the new technologies that are at its disposal, we now start to see global control from a centralized, or recently somewhat disparately decentralized for home workers, but really the center of excellence approach to manage a global organization with a tight group of professionals. This further enables the right sourcing of the contract compliance and audit teams. And right sourcing should not sound like downsizing. In many ways, we've seen teams expand by bringing people in from the business units, sales operation, revenue capture teams, risk, professional liability managers, and tapping these global resources into this sort of centralized COE function, because it's been enabled through the use of technology. By empowering people that are closest to your contracting partners to leverage the knowledge management from a central repository, giving them the capabilities to amplify through automation and AI, they can further support the improved global processes that are identified through a transformation exercise, and really extend the value of the center of excellence out to the edge of the organization. Fundamentally, this is just the right use of an agile platform and agile approach. And I think the word agile has been used by all three of us at least 3 times each now. And Agile really is just the process of making iterative change in incremental ways. So it's doing something better each time, identifying what can be changed, changing it slightly, seeing it improve and move forward. The same process is what we use to make artificial intelligence engines better so that they become smarter and more accurate the more that they're used. Likewise, our teams can go through the exact same process, and through continuous measurement monitoring can support a very dynamic and global change management process.
Through this blending of people, process, and technology, totally agree. So I think we're coming to very rapidly to the end of our time, but I think we've got just a very quick response from Margie on the question here that we have. In terms of your deployment, obviously you adopted an agile process, we understand that, but was it big bang or did you do it in parts, is the question?
Oh, no, we definitely did it in parts. So we did the implementation in parts. I think I talked a little bit about that. So pre-implementation was all done on an agile, pieced out, kind of step by step basis. But then when we did the post implementation world, we also did kind of an agile for that as well, where instead of rolling out saying here, we have this new platform and rolling it out to everybody, we did it on a very methodical, slow roll basis, where we just went out to who were our users of our last platform. And then we started expanding it out into other business units that weren't necessarily leveraging that platform at the time, to start building and growing that world. So it was definitely a very methodical, slow rollout approach to the implementation. And for us, that worked extremely well, because otherwise, can you imagine trying to roll out a, contract repository platform to, 60 countries and, 53 potential 1,000 people. So for us, it was absolutely crucial that we handle it in a very, that very methodical, slow rollout approach.
Right, so, and certainly our recommendations are along that. Do it in parts, either by a particular function, but by a particular contracting type, by a particular geo, as in your case. So that's a much less risky strategy than one that's the big bang. Totally. Okay, well, with an eye to the time, guys. Wow, that hour just rushed by, didn't it? So all that remains for me to do is to say thank you. Thank you to our audience today for the great questions that you've asked, and also for your participation in the session. But also, it would be remiss of me not to thank particularly to Margie Jorgensen from Cushman and Wakefield, and also Art Reget from Altria for your great support today. So thank you very much indeed. I hope you enjoyed being panelists today.
We did. It was a great time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. And so all that there then remains for me to do is to wish all participants today a very enjoyable rest of the day. Thank you very much for your time, and goodbye. Thank you. Bye-bye.